The judge's face turned ashen as he stared at the thin file. He glared at my father, then at his smug attorney, and finally at me. For 3 agonizing seconds, the courtroom lost all its oxygen. My father's smirk froze. Suddenly, the judge shoved his leather chair back, slamming it against the wood wall. "Suspend these proceedings immediately," his voice roared, cold and absolute. "Nobody leaves this room. Call court security right now." Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Eliana Boyd. To understand how I ended up in that suffocating courtroom, staring down the barrel of my own father's betrayal as the judge screamed for security, you have to rewind the clock. You have to go back exactly 4 months to a time when I still foolishly believed blood actually meant something. I am 32 years old, working as a senior cybersecurity risk analyst at Aegis Horizon Analytics, an ultra-classified private security firm. My daily existence is a cold, calculated labyrinth of zero-day vulnerabilities, encrypted network architectures, and threat mitigation. In my professional world, data does not lie. People do. I was trained by the absolute best to be ruthlessly pragmatic and to constantly anticipate the worst in human behavior. Yet, beneath the impenetrable firewall I built around my emotions, there was a pathetic, lingering vulnerability. I carried a desperate, quiet craving for the unconditional family love I never received. That craving was the sole reason I spent every single weekend driving down the desolate highways to the Willamette Valley in Oregon. My uncle Arthur lived there. He was an eccentric, fiercely independent man who had isolated himself on a sprawling, sun-drenched vineyard far away from the toxic reach of our immediate family, while my father, Marcus, and my designer brand-obsessed younger sister, Chloe, treated Arthur like a ghost. I was the only one who showed up. When the aggressive pancreatic cancer took hold, tearing through his frail body, I was the one holding the medical basin. I was the one tracking his morphine doses, sitting in the dimly lit, dusty farmhouse, listening to his raspy breaths echo into the late hours of the night. Marcus and Chloe never visited, not once. They were far too busy attending high society galas in Seattle, swiping platinum credit cards, and pretending that a dying relative was merely an inconvenient rumor. Then came the inevitable funeral. It was a bleak, rain-soaked Tuesday morning. My father and sister finally made their grand appearance, dressed in immaculate, tailored black cashmere. They looked more like they were strutting down a red carpet for a morning-themed fashion event than burying their own flesh and blood. They wept empty, calculated tears for the cameras and the sympathetic gazes of their wealthy social circles. 2 days later, the real mask slipped. We sat in the polished, mahogany-paneled office of Arthur's estate attorney. The air in the room was thick, suffocating with the scent of Chloe's expensive perfume and the unspoken, raw greed radiating from my father. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his gold-rimmed spectacles before reading the final will and testament aloud. Arthur did not leave a single dime to Marcus. He did not leave a single cent to Chloe. He left his entire estate entirely to me. It was not just the vineyard. Arthur had secretly built a highly classified, subterranean data storage vault deep beneath the estate's soil, leasing underground server space to tech giants who craved absolute physical security. The total valuation of the assets was $15 million. The silence in the lawyer's office lasted for exactly 3 seconds before the eruption. Chloe violently slammed her manicured hands onto the desk, her heavy designer rings gouging the ancient wood. "This is a sick joke," she shrieked, her face twisting into something remarkably ugly and feral. "You cannot be serious." Marcus abruptly stood up, his face transforming into a mask of pure purple fury. He pointed a trembling, accusing finger straight at my face. "You manipulative little snake," he snarled. his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You brainwashed him. You isolated a sick, senile old man in the middle of nowhere and forced him to sign his life over to you. I will not let you steal our legacy." Our legacy, the phrase hung heavily in the air, dripping with absolute irony. They had not spoken to Arthur in over 10 years, yet they dared to claim his life's work as their own birthright. I sat there perfectly still, my analyst brain processing the immediate threat. I genuinely thought it was just an impulsive tantrum, the bitter, fleeting sting of losing out on a massive payday. I was entirely wrong. It was a formal declaration of war. A few weeks passed in deceptive silence. I returned to my intense routines at Aegis Horizon Analytics, assuming the storm had blown over and they had accepted defeat. But greedy monsters do not sleep. They scheme. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, a blank-faced process server intercepted me in the lobby of my office building and handed me a thick, sealed manila envelope. It was a court summons. I opened the file, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, and the blood instantly drained from my face. My father had not filed a standard civil contest to dispute the will. He had done something infinitely more sinister. He had filed a formal petition for full legal conservatorship over me. He was demanding total judicial and financial guardianship, brazenly claiming that my high-stress career had triggered debilitating paranoid delusions. The paperwork officially alleged that I was mentally incapacitated, a severe danger to myself, and entirely unfit to manage my own affairs, let alone an estate worth $15 million. He was not just trying to take the inheritance, he was trying to completely erase my autonomy. He was coming for my freedom, my sanity, and my very right to exist as an independent adult. He wanted to legally lock me in a cage of his own making, and he was weaponizing the justice system to do it. The betrayal was so absolute, so suffocatingly dark, that for a long moment I could not draw a single breath. My own flesh and blood had just signed my death warrant. I did not shed a single tear. Crying is a biological response to sudden trauma, an overwhelmed nervous system desperately trying to process pain. But what I felt in the immediate aftermath of reading that court summons was not pain. It was absolute, freezing clarity. I did not need a therapist to hold my hand and validate my feelings. I needed a mercenary. I needed a butcher in a perfectly tailored suit. That very same afternoon, I hired Elias Thorne. Elias was not a standard family law practitioner. He was a high-stakes corporate defense attorney who specialized in defending against catastrophic financial fraud and corporate espionage. He possessed the emotional warmth of a starving reptile and an industry reputation for completely, mercilessly destroying opposing counsel. When I sat in his sprawling, glass-walled office in downtown Seattle and slid the conservatorship petition across his massive mahogany desk, he did not offer empty sympathy. He read it in dead silence, his dark eyes scanning the pages with clinical detachment. "Your family is exceptionally ambitious," Elias finally said, closing the heavy folder. "And they are remarkably stupid if they think they can execute a hostile takeover of a human being without leaving a massive paper trail. Let us see what kind of fiction they have written for the judge." The discovery file my father and Chloe submitted to the court was nothing short of a masterpiece of malicious fiction. Sitting in the dimly lit conference room beside Elias, we reviewed the supposed rock-solid evidence of my impending mental collapse. The first exhibit was a secure data drive containing audio recordings. I sat utterly frozen as the high-fidelity speakers played my own voice. It was undeniably my specific cadence, my exact vocal pitch. But the words were entirely foreign. The voice on the recording was shrieking obscenities, sobbing uncontrollably, and making violent, graphic threats of self-harm. Elias raised a sharp eyebrow, pausing the digital track. "Is that you?" he asked smoothly, his pen poised over a yellow legal pad. "It is a deepfake," I replied, my voice perfectly steady despite the violent nausea rising in my throat. "It is a highly sophisticated neural network voice cloning algorithm. They likely trained the artificial intelligence model using years of mundane, everyday voicemails I left for my sister. Listen closely to the digital artifacting and the background noise during the higher octaves. It is synthetic. Next came the financial statements. They produced hundreds of pages of forged bank ledgers and offshore wire transfer logs. The documents painted a horrifying picture of a woman entirely detached from reality, supposedly hemorrhaging hundreds of thousands of dollars into shadowy, anonymous cryptocurrency casinos based in Eastern Europe. According to their beautifully crafted narrative, the $15 million my uncle left me would be gambled away in a matter of weeks if my father was not given immediate control. But the synthetic audio and the fabricated casino logs were just the supporting act, the absolute crown jewel of their legal arsenal. The weapon specifically designed to deliver the fatal blow to my freedom was a comprehensive, 60-page psychiatric evaluation. It was officially signed and stamped by a chief psychiatrist named Dr. Aris. The document was chillingly clinical and incredibly thorough. It detailed a severe, rapid-onset psychotic break, officially diagnosing me with acute debilitating paranoia brought on by the crushing, relentless stress of corporate cybersecurity work. The language was meticulously chosen to satisfy every single legal threshold required for a forced conservatorship in the state of Washington. In the concluding paragraph, Dr. Aris strongly, unequivocally recommended my immediate, mandatory commitment to a secure inpatient psychiatric facility. He explicitly urged the court to completely revoke my financial autonomy and appoint my father as the sole guardian of my estate to prevent catastrophic self-destruction. It was perfectly formatted, legally airtight, and terrifyingly plausible to an uneducated judge. They made one fatal miscalculation. They completely forgot what I do for a living. I am a senior risk analyst for a top-tier security firm. I hunt digital phantoms in the dark web for breakfast. Give me a single loose thread in a digital ecosystem, and I will unravel your entire existence. Instead of succumbing to the blind panic they were counting on, I retreated into my element. I bypassed Elias's expensive team of private investigators, logged into my heavily encrypted terminal, and went straight to the source. I began a surgical, relentless deconstruction of Dr. Aris. Within 4 hours, I cracked the perfect facade. The medical license number prominently listed on the evaluation belonged to a deceased pediatrician in Ohio. I traced the routing data of the clinic's official website. It was not hosted on a secure, compliant medical server. It was routed through a cheap, disposable virtual private network based in Cyprus. I dug deeper into the domain registry, bypassing 2 layers of fake proxies, and cross-referenced the corporate tax filings. The prestigious psychiatric clinic of Dr. Aris simply did not exist. It was a hollow shell company, a phantom corporate entity legally registered to a completely empty virtual mail drop inside a rundown strip mall in Nevada. Then, I checked the exact digital timestamp of the clinic's legal incorporation. The shell company had been formally registered exactly 2 months ago. I stared at the glowing green numbers on my dual monitors, and for the very first time since this nightmare began, a profound, aching coldness seeped deep into my bones. 2 months ago. Uncle Arthur was still alive 2 months ago. I was sitting by his hospital bed, holding his frail, trembling hand and feeding him ice chips, while my father and sister were secretly hiring shell corporations to have me declared legally insane. This was not a sudden, knee-jerk reaction born out of impulsive anger over a surprising will. This was a meticulously orchestrated, highly funded smear campaign. They had fully anticipated Arthur cutting them out of the inheritance. They had planned my psychological execution before his heart had even stopped beating. I was never a beloved daughter or a sister to them. I was simply an obstacle standing between them and a massive payout. I had been their prey all along. The question that hung in Elias Thorne's office was no longer how they were trying to destroy me, but why they were moving with such reckless, desperate speed. Simple greed is usually patient. It waits for the legal system to grind through standard probate courts, but creating deepfakes, fabricating medical records, and hiring phantom corporations required massive upfront capital and carried the risk of severe federal prison time. This was not a calculated long game. This was a panic response. Somebody was out of time. People do not burn down the house unless the wolves are already at the door, Elias said, pacing across the plush carpet, holding a crystal glass of bourbon he poured but never drank. Your father and sister project an image of untouchable Seattle old money, country clubs, charity galas, luxury imported vehicles, but wealth that loud is usually heavily leveraged. We need to strip them down to their financial bones. I want to see the marrow. I did exactly that. I packed up my equipment and relocated to a secure, windowless conference room in the basement of Aegis Horizon Analytics. I brought in 3 high-capacity servers and cordoned off a completely isolated network. I was not going to break the law, but I was going to bend public data access to its absolute breaking point. I targeted the weakest link in their glittering social armor. I targeted Julian, my sister Chloe's husband. On paper, Julian was a visionary venture capitalist, the golden boy of the Pacific Northwest tech investment scene. He regularly gave keynote speeches at startup incubators and posted professionally curated photographs of his yacht on social media. But when I began scraping the metadata from public property tax records, Shell Corporation filings, and unsecured municipal zoning permits, his empire started to look like a flimsy house of cards, completely submerged in water. I exploited a completely legal loophole in the state corporate registry database. By tracing the digital footprint of a defaulted mezzanine loan attached to one of Julian's failed commercial real estate projects, I managed to map out his entire network of subsidiary holdings. The man was not a venture capitalist. He was a professional fraudster operating a highly sophisticated Ponzi scheme. Every single one of his legitimate technology investments had filed for bankruptcy over 3 years ago. But standard financial ruin was not enough to trigger the sheer insanity of my father's conservatorship plan. I kept digging. I ran his name through global tracking databases, specifically looking for offshore wire transfers that fell just under the mandatory federal reporting threshold of $10,000. That is when I found the bleeding artery. Julian had not just lost money belonging to wealthy Seattle socialites. In a desperate bid to keep his lavish lifestyle afloat and prevent his Ponzi scheme from collapsing, he had borrowed heavily from an unregulated shadow lending syndicate operating out of Macau. I managed to intercept an unsecured, encrypted email packet that had been bouncing between a proxy server in Hong Kong and Julian's private home network. I cracked the encryption key using a standard brute force algorithm. The contents of the message made the blood freeze in my veins. It was a digital ledger, attached to a very plain, brutally direct ultimatum. Julian was currently carrying a black market debt totaling exactly $8 million. The principal was enormous, but the compound interest was lethal, accumulating at a rate of 25% every single month. The message contained a high-resolution photograph of Chloe sipping coffee at her favorite downtown cafe, taken through the crosshairs of a telephoto lens. The text below the image was brief. It gave Julian exactly 60 days to liquidate his assets and wire the $8 million, or his wife would be taken as collateral. It was a blood debt. Pay the money, or pay with your life. The timeline perfectly aligned with my father's sudden, vicious attack on my sanity. But how were they planning to extract the cash from my estate without triggering a massive federal tax audit? A forced conservatorship would grant my father control of the assets. But he could not simply wire $8 million from an American bank to a crime syndicate in Macau without being instantly arrested for international money laundering. "They need a washing machine," Elias murmured, leaning over my shoulder as we stared at the horrifying email. A clean, legitimate corporate entity to absorb the estate, completely separate from Julian's toxic name. Look for a newly formed holding company, something registered right around the time your uncle received his terminal diagnosis. I opened the global corporate registry and filtered the results by date, focusing on states with absolute corporate anonymity laws like Delaware and Wyoming. Within 45 minutes, I hit the jackpot. A private limited liability company named Vanguard Zenith Holdings had been officially incorporated in Delaware. The exact date of incorporation was just 4 days after the hospital oncology department informed my Uncle Arthur that he had less than 6 months to live. Because Delaware allows absolute anonymity for corporate owners, the public registry was blank. But they made a crucial, arrogant mistake. They used the exact same boutique corporate registered agent that my father used for his legitimate maritime shipping business in Seattle. I cross-referenced the digital signature certificates used to file the formation documents. The anonymous managing directors of Vanguard Zenith Holdings were my father, Marcus, and my brother-in-law, Julian. The sheer scale of their cruelty finally crystallized in front of me, clicking together like the tumblers of a bank vault. The master plan was entirely devoid of any human empathy. My father would use the fabricated medical records and deepfake audio to convince the judge that I was completely insane. Once the judge signed the conservatorship order, my father would gain total legal authority over the Willamette Valley Vineyard and the highly classified underground data vault. As my legal guardian, he would declare that managing the tech-heavy estate was too burdensome for my fragile mental state. He would then execute a private, closed-door fire sale, selling the entire $15 million property to Vanguard Zenith Holdings for an absolute fraction of its true value, perhaps $2 million. Since he and Julian secretly owned Vanguard Zenith Holdings, they would effectively be selling the property to themselves. Vanguard Zenith Holdings would then immediately liquidate the physical assets, selling the underground server farm to a major tech conglomerate for its true $15 million market value. The money would enter the holding company as clean, legitimate corporate revenue, entirely untraceable to my Uncle Arthur's estate. From there, Julian could easily route the $8 million through offshore corporate dividends to pay off the crime syndicate, saving his own life and maintaining the family's flawless, wealthy reputation. And what about me? What was my role in this grand financial rescue mission? I would be heavily medicated, locked inside a padded room in a mandatory psychiatric facility, entirely stripped of my human rights, my career, and my dignity. My father was perfectly willing to sacrifice his own biological daughter, legally condemning me to a lifetime of institutionalized torture, just to cover up his son-in-law's catastrophic failures and protect his golden child from the consequences of her husband's actions. They did not just want everything I owned. They wanted to destroy my entire existence to ensure I could never fight back. The storm was gathering, but the final, lethal piece of our counteroffensive arrived not from my digital hunting, but from a sudden fracture within their own ranks. It happened on a Tuesday evening, just 3 days before the scheduled conservatorship hearing. Elias and I were sitting in his office, reviewing the heavily redacted financial trails, when his private terminal chimed with a highly unusual notification. It was a fully encrypted, anonymous email utilizing a military-grade routing protocol. Elias decrypted the payload. The sender was a senior paralegal working directly inside the law firm hired by my father. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for immunity. According to her brief, terrified message, the sheer cruelty of what she was being forced to process had finally broken her professional silence. She had spent the last 2 weeks organizing the fabricated psychiatric files, and her conscience could no longer bear the weight of sending an innocent, highly competent woman to a locked psychiatric ward just to facilitate a corporate money laundering scheme. She provided a set of GPS coordinates for a dead-drop locker at a downtown transit station and a numerical passcode. Within an hour, Elias had dispatched his most trusted private investigator to retrieve the package. It was a standard, unmarked black USB drive. We plugged it into my isolated offline server, scanning it for malicious tracking software before opening the root directory. What we found inside was not just a smoking gun. It was a complete, meticulously documented confession of an impending financial massacre. The drive contained hundreds of pages of pre-drafted legal contracts, asset transfer authorizations, and binding corporate resolutions. My father and Julian had not just planned the hostile takeover, they had already finalized the exact mechanics of the sale. Every single document required to immediately transfer ownership of the Willamette Valley estate and the underground data vault to Vanguard Zenith Holdings was completely ready to go. But the true horror lay at the bottom of the electronic documents. I zoomed in on the signature lines of the primary transfer deeds. My digital signature, complete with the cryptographic hashes I strictly use for secure corporate authorizations at Aegis Horizon Analytics, was already stamped onto the documents. They had somehow compromised an old, redundant hardware token I left at my father's house years ago, cloning my digital identity. This was no longer just a civil dispute over a conservatorship. This was aggravated identity theft and federal wire fraud, meticulously executed before the judge had even struck his gavel. They were planning to push the electronic transfer buttons the exact second the court ruling was issued. As horrifying as the forged contracts were, they paled in comparison to the final folder on the drive. It contained exported internal email communications between my father, Julian, and their lead attorney. I opened the most recent thread, dated just 2 days prior. The message from my father was brief, entirely devoid of any parental hesitation. It read, "Make sure she is locked in the psychiatric ward by Friday afternoon. No delays, no extensions. We need the 48 hours of the weekend to disperse the funds and finalize the offshore routing before the standard banking system detects anything on Monday morning. Once she is fully medicated and committed, she will not be able to contest the transfers." I stared at the glowing white text on the monitor. Friday afternoon. That was the exact time our hearing was scheduled. My own father had systematically calculated the precise amount of time it would take for heavy psychiatric sedatives to completely incapacitate my brain. He needed me chemically neutralized for exactly 48 hours so he could drain $15 million from my legacy to save his fraudulent son-in-law. There was no rage left in my body. There was only an absolute, terrifying vacuum where my heart used to be. I looked across the desk at Elias. "We take this to the federal authorities right now," I said, my voice as hard as cracked ice. "This is a massive federal conspiracy." Elias slowly leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, incredibly dark smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of an apex predator that had just locked the cage from the inside. "No," Elias replied smoothly, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous, brilliant light. "If we go to the authorities now, your father will panic. He will claim his computer was hacked. He will blame the paralegal, and he will tie us up in endless jurisdictional delays. He might even flee the country. We are not going to prevent him from walking into that courtroom." I narrowed my eyes, instantly understanding the architecture of his trap. "You want him to present the forged evidence under oath?" "Exactly," Elias whispered, tapping his expensive pen against the mahogany desk. "We are going to let them walk into that courtroom feeling like absolute gods. We are going to let their arrogant lawyer submit every single piece of fake audio, every fabricated medical report, and every forged signature directly into the official, sworn court record. We will let them commit multiple, undeniable counts of felony perjury in front of a sitting judge. We will not just defeat them, Eliana. We are going to turn that courtroom into their permanent graveyard." Friday afternoon arrived with the suffocating pressure of a looming execution. The courtroom in downtown Seattle was clad in heavy dark oak, the air stale and thick with tension. I sat beside Elias Thorne at the respondent's table, my posture impeccably straight, a sharply tailored navy blue suit acting as my final layer of armor. Across the center aisle sat my father, Marcus. He was currently dabbing his perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed silk handkerchief, playing the role of the tragic, grieving patriarch to absolute perfection. Next to him, Chloe stared blankly at her lap, attempting to look distressed but mostly just looking deeply bored by the legal proceedings. Julian was noticeably absent from the gallery, likely hiding in his pristine office, frantically awaiting the text message from my father that would authorize the $8 million wire transfer to his overseas extortionists. Their lead attorney, a slick, overpaid theatrical performer named Harrison Vance, took the floor to deliver his opening statement. It was a masterclass in manufactured empathy and calculated character assassination. He paced slowly before the judge's elevated bench, his voice trembling with highly practiced sorrow. "Your Honor, we are not here today out of malice, and we are certainly not here out of greed. We are here out of desperate, profound parental love," Vance proclaimed, gesturing dramatically toward my father. My client is watching his eldest daughter, a brilliant and formerly successful cybersecurity analyst, completely unravel before his very eyes. The crushing, relentless pressure of her corporate espionage work has thoroughly broken her mind. She is isolated. She is drowning in severe paranoia. And she is currently steering her family's historic legacy straight off a catastrophic financial cliff. Vance spent the next 45 minutes painting a terrifying masterpiece of my supposed insanity. I watched, silently fascinated by the sheer audacity of it all, as he physically lifted the heavy stacks of fabricated evidence from his table. We formally submit into the official court record, under penalty of perjury, these digital audio recordings demonstrating severe, uncontrollable psychotic episodes. We also submit comprehensive financial ledgers detailing hundreds of thousands of dollars squandered in anonymous cryptocurrency gambling over the past 6 months, Vance stated boldly, holding the fake flash drives up for the judge to see. Furthermore, and most tragically, we submit the sworn medical evaluation from a highly respected professional, Dr. Aris, which strongly recommends the immediate mandatory psychiatric commitment of Eliana Boyd. Elias did not object. He did not shift in his leather chair. He did not even blink. He simply let Vance dig the grave deeper and deeper, allowing every single piece of forged documentation to be officially stamped by the court clerk and permanently entered into the federal record. Once a document is entered into evidence under oath, any fabrication instantly graduates from a sleazy tactic to a severe, undeniable felony. Elias was quietly locking the heavy steel doors to the slaughterhouse. When Vance finally concluded his tear-soaked performance, taking his seat with a smug, victorious sigh, the judge turned his attention to our table. "Mr. Thorne, does the defense wish to make an opening statement?" Elias stood up slowly, calmly buttoning his tailored jacket. He did not mirror Vance's emotional theatrics. He operated with the chilling, absolute precision of a surgical blade. "We have no need for a dramatic, fictional narrative, Your Honor," Elias began, his voice echoing cleanly and sharply off the wooden walls. "We prefer to rely strictly on verifiable, empirical data." Elias walked to the center of the room and handed the court clerk a slim, neatly bound corporate portfolio. "I am submitting my client's official a top-secret psychological clearance evaluation. This was conducted exactly 21 days ago by a panel of 4 independent, federally contracted psychiatrists for Aegis Horizon Analytics. As you will see on page 3, her mental fitness score is 100%. She is actively cleared to handle the nation's most sensitive security infrastructure. I am also submitting her complete, unblemished financial history, directly certified by 3 major banking institutions. These documents prove a flawless credit score of over 800 and exactly $0 invested in cryptocurrency. My client is not delusional, Your Honor. She is simply independently wealthy, and her family is extremely impatient." Vance jumped to his feet, his face flushing a violent shade of red. "Objection, Your Honor. Paper trails can be manipulated by a cybersecurity expert. We have a sworn medical professional sitting in the hallway right now, fully prepared to testify to her immediate, terrifying mental decline under oath." "Then let us hear from him," Elias countered smoothly, turning to face the gallery doors. I called Dr. Aris to the stand. A nervous, heavily sweating man in a slightly oversized beige suit shuffled into the courtroom and up to the witness box. This was the actor they had hired to play the Phantom Doctor. He placed his trembling hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Elias approached the wooden podium, resting his hands lightly on the edges. "Dr. Aris," Elias said, the title dripping with thinly veiled contempt, "you state with absolute certainty in your 60-page evaluation that my client suffers from acute, debilitating paranoia. Can you please confirm for the court the exact date you conducted this comprehensive psychiatric interview?" The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward my father. "It was the 14th of last month, in my Seattle clinic." "Fascinating," Elias replied, his voice dropping into a dangerous whisper, "because on the 14th of last month, my client was physically located inside a highly secure heavily monitored server vault in Langley, Virginia. The flight logs and biometric security stamps are already in the clerk's hands, and yet, somehow, she was also sitting on your couch in Seattle. Truly a medical miracle. Before the sweating man could stammer a coherent response, Elias pulled a single, officially stamped sheet of paper from his inside pocket. "Tell me, doctor, how long have you been actively practicing medicine without a state license?" "Objection!" Vance roared, practically leaping over his defense table. "Counsel is badgering the witness with baseless slander. I hold in my hand the official, certified registry records from the Washington State Medical Board," Elias continued, completely ignoring the outburst and raising his voice just enough to dominate the entire room. "There is no Dr. Aris legally registered to practice in this state. Furthermore, the specific medical license number printed on this sworn evaluation belongs to a pediatrician who passed away exactly 12 years ago in Cleveland, Ohio. The man sitting in that box is not a licensed psychiatrist. He is a paid proxy committing blatant perjury." The courtroom erupted into total chaos. Vance frantically tried to whisper to my father, whose carefully constructed mask of confident grief was rapidly melting into sheer, unadulterated panic. Chloe gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white as she finally realized the walls were caving in. The fake doctor looked like he was about to vomit directly onto the microphone. The judge banged his heavy wooden gavel aggressively, the sharp cracks echoing like gunshots over the shouting. "Order! I will have absolute order in this court right now," he bellowed. His face was a thundercloud of extreme confusion and rapidly rising anger. He glared down at Elias. "Mr. Thorne, this is a highly irregular and incredibly severe accusation. I am currently presiding over a standard civil conservatorship dispute, not a criminal fraud tribunal. Where exactly are you going with this circus?" "Your Honor, this was never a civil dispute," Elias answered, his voice dropping into a register of pure, uncompromising authority. "This entire proceeding is an active, premeditated crime scene." Elias walked calmly back to our table. He picked up the final, fatal piece of evidence we had prepared. It was a thick, heavy document file, bound tightly and sealed with a bright red legal sticker. Across the front, in bold black typography, were the words, "Pending Transactions." He carried the heavy file back to the bench, bypassing the clerk, and placed it directly on the polished wood in front of the judge. "Your Honor, opposing counsel claimed they want a conservatorship to protect my client's estate from being squandered," Elias said, locking eyes with the furious magistrate. "I suggest you open that file. Inside that red folder, you will find the real reason we were dragged here today." The judge broke the thick red seal of the pending transactions folder. He pulled out the heavy stack of pre-signed asset transfer deeds and the exported internal email threads. As his eyes scanned the highlighted text of my father's message, the one explicitly demanding I be heavily medicated and locked away for 48 hours to bypass the banking security algorithms, the entire atmosphere of the room violently shifted. The judge's face turned ashen as he stared at the thin file. He glared at my father, then at his smug attorney, and finally at me. For 3 agonizing seconds, the courtroom lost all its oxygen. My father's smirk froze. Suddenly, the judge shoved his leather chair back, slamming it against the wood wall. "Suspend these proceedings immediately," his voice roared. "Cold and absolute. Nobody leaves this room. Call court security right now." At that exact moment, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the gallery slowly creaked open. Julian slipped inside, panting slightly, expecting to witness his glorious financial salvation. Instead, he walked right into a steel trap. 4 armed court bailiffs instantly moved to the exits, locking the heavy brass deadbolts with a resounding, terrifying click. The realization of absolute ruin washed over the defense table in a tidal wave. The orchestrated, elegant unity of my toxic family shattered into a million jagged pieces of pure panic. Julian, realizing the offshore paper trail had just been exposed to a federal magistrate, pointed a trembling, cowardly finger at my father. He started screaming at the top of his lungs that Marcus had forged the digital signatures without his knowledge. Marcus violently shoved his own lawyer, violently cursing Harrison Vance for blindly submitting the fake evidence into the room under oath. And Chloe, my beautiful, pristine, fiercely arrogant sister, collapsed entirely. She dropped to her hands and knees, crawling toward the small wooden gate that separated the gallery from the legal tables, her desperate tears completely ruining her expensive designer makeup. "Eliana, please," she wailed, her voice cracking with pathetic, animalistic desperation. "I had no idea what they were doing to you. We are sisters. You have to tell them I did not know." I sat perfectly still in my chair, calmly adjusting the cuffs of my navy suit. I looked down at the woman who shared my blood, the woman who was perfectly willing to let me rot in a heavily sedated, padded cell for the rest of my life just to protect her luxury lifestyle. My eyes were cold, hollow, and utterly devoid of a single ounce of mercy. I did not say a word. I did not have to. The civil conservatorship hearing completely dissolved, instantly mutating into ground zero of a massive federal criminal investigation. The authorities raided Julian's corporate headquarters that very same afternoon. Within 48 hours, their entire criminal syndicate was fully unraveled. There were no lenient plea deals offered. The fake evidence Elias had expertly guided them into submitting under oath served as the absolute, undeniable proof of extreme felony perjury, conspiracy to commit international wire fraud, and attempted medical kidnapping. My father, my sister, my brother-in-law, and their highly paid attorney were all stripped of their tailored suits and handed standard-issue orange jumpsuits. They are currently facing decades in a federal penitentiary, their precious Seattle legacy completely eradicated. Fast forward exactly 1 year. I am standing on the expansive cedar balcony of the main farmhouse at the Willamette Valley estate. The crisp, cool Oregon breeze rustles through the endless, sun-drenched rows of grapevines. I take a slow sip of a perfectly aged Pinot Noir, watching my newly adopted rescue horse, Brimstone, peacefully grazing in the lush lower pasture. The classified underground data vault hums silently beneath the earth, generating massive, completely clean revenue. Looking out over the stunning, quiet landscape, I finally understand the true magnitude of my Uncle Arthur's final gift. The greatest asset he left me was not the $15 million. It was the ultimate, undeniable test that forced the monsters in my family out of the shadows. It was the golden opportunity to permanently identify and surgically remove the malignant, toxic tumors operating under the sacred guise of family. If you take anything away from my survival, let it be this. Unconditional kindness is not the same thing as passive submission. You do not owe your sanity or your freedom to people who only view you as a disposable financial resource. And sometimes, the absolute most devastating way to protect yourself from ruthless, greedy people is to simply stand back, hand them a shovel, and let them furiously dig their own graves. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Maya Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.